So, good morning, students. So, how many of you have connected? Only one. Anyone? Anyone else who is connected? Only two of you. So, let us just wait for 5 minutes and then we'll start. Okay, then, so let us start now. In the previous class, we were discussing about exception handling, right? Yes, object. We'll cover up with object-oriented programming and then we'll go to Coa. Okay. So, previous class we were covering up with exception handling. Now, the reason we selected this particular web page was some pages of our PDF was not working. Even yesterday night, I think one of your friends has uploaded the PDF, but I have seen it also contains missing pages. So what you can do is you can see for that in your hard copy if you have got it. So exception, what is an exception? What is an exception? Yesterday we were reading about exception, right? No answers. So exceptions are your anomalies or abnormal conditions which happens whenever you are running a program. Okay, so essentially, except for exception handling or for error handling, an explicit mechanism has been designed in your C++, which is known as exception handling. Okay, now what are the main advantages? The main advantages are you can separate the error handling code from your normal code. So this helps transparency as well as flexibility to the program. Okay, now you can also say design multiple functions or methods to handle the error or exception whatever is coming up in your program. Now to implement this exception handling, there are some keywords assigned. So these are try, throw and catch. Okay, so what is this try keyword? So basically you will create a try block, means whatever code of the program is likely to generate an error, you will place that code inside the try block. Okay, so try will be followed by some parentheses. Okay, so you will place the statements which are likely to generate an error within this try block. Now if an error occurs, you have to throw it. Okay, so you will throw the appropriate exception. Okay, so once you have thrown in, you have to again design a catch block which will catch that particular exception. Okay, so what is this catch block going to do? It is going to perform the desired operation if an error occurs. Okay, or if an exception at all is generated, so this catch mechanism will be activated and it will perform the designated operation. Okay, so yesterday we saw a basic example, so we'll again see it today. So hash include iostream using namespace std, then int main int x is equal to -1 they have placed here. Now what they're doing, cout before try, then try. So here if you see here, this is the try block. So try is followed by braces, so cout inside try. So if x is less than 0, then what they are doing is, okay, actually it is better you go to this web page. Actually I think this part has not come up over here. So what you can do is you can, sorry, so all of you can go to this particular link. Okay, so there if you see the example, so you will see that just go to the first code that is available there. Have you opened the web page? So just go to the first code whatever is available. So if you see here, hash include iostream using namespace std int main. Okay, then next comes int x is equal to -1 cout before try. Okay, then try cout inside try. If x is less than 0, throw x. Okay, so here they are explicitly throwing this x. Okay, now in C++ you can throw a basic data type, you can throw an object, whatever you want. Okay, so here x has been specified as int, so they are basically throwing an int data type. Okay, So there is no as such restriction what you can throw, what you cannot throw. Basically, based upon your program, you have to decide this particular thing. Okay, you can also keep some flag variables, okay, or some status variable, so you can throw that particular status variable also. So once it has been thrown, it is being caught by this catch block. Okay, so uh, below part, if you see, they have given this catch block, so catch intx, and they are giving exception caught. Okay, so this catch block is executed whenever an exception is thrown. So the type of the uh, means variable or the data type which you are throwing here is x. So if an integer is thrown, at that time this particular catch block is going to get activated and will be executed. Okay, so here if x was greater than 0, so at that time this entire throw block or this particular block will not have been executed. So if at all a error or a particular condition is met, then only this exception is being thrown. Okay, so exception basically means errors. Okay, the errors might be due to user input or it might be due to some system failure. So you can categorize your program based on the type of exception you are throwing. So you will extensively get this exception handling in your Java and this kind of languages, and you have to implement this while you go for your mini project, like if you are designing a system with DBMS or this kind of say softwares. So at that time you will see that explicitly you have to have this exception handling mechanism, okay, or else your program is likely to give you a lot of errors. So this has to be there. So although it is not that extensively used in C++, yes, it is used, but say for beginners, I think you are not using it up to that level. So as you go on in your courses, you will see that exception handling is being widely used. Okay, so next what we had seen some basic programs like how you can uh, catch the exceptions. Okay, so next second, if you browse a bit below, you will see. Okay, I'll do one thing. I'll try to add my browser here. So next portion, if you see here, they have defined something known as a default catch mechanism. Okay, or say a catch block to catch default exception means here just see the syntax catch followed by this dots. So this will specify a default exception means even if you are not specifying the type, like say whether it should be throw or car or anything, so whatever exception you are throwing, this particular catch block will catch it. Why? Because it is catching up default exception means if any to catch a particular type of exception it is not defined, so this block will be executed. Okay, so next if you see, we had this implicit type conversion where what we are doing, so using namespace std main through a catch catch default. So here in your object oriented programming, it does not allow your implicit conversion means if you are throwing a car exception, so you have to have this catch block to catch this car exception. You cannot catch a car exception with the help of an int I mean a catch block designed to catch the INT exception. Okay. Moreover, if an exception is thrown and not caught anywhere, the program terminates abnormally. So here they have given this, but don't get confused here. Here if you see, they have thrown an exception, but what is happening, it is actually trying to catch an INT exception. So this statement, whenever it will be executed, it will generate error. Okay, so you can, how can you resolve this? You can resolve this either by placing a catch block to catch up a card exception, or you can define a catch block to catch any default exception. So you can resolve this error with the help of these remedies basically. Okay, for derived classes, what and derived class and base class, what you have got, a derived class exception should be caught before a base class exception. Okay, so you can see the link for details. So here they have given one more point which specifies, unlike Java, in C++, all exceptions are unchecked. Compiler does not check whether an exception is caught or not. For example, in C++, it is not necessary to specify all uncaught exceptions in a function declaration, although it is recommended practice to do so. For example, the following program compiles fine, but ideally signature of fun should list unchecked exceptions. So here what they are trying to say is, even though the compiler is not explicitly checking what exceptions are being thrown or not, but still it is a good practice to keep a check about these things. Okay, means what sort of exception you are throwing and what is your catch block actually accepting. So here you will see that there is a variation here, like they are explicitly specifying that they are throwing a pointer and int, means either it might be a pointer or it might be int. Okay, so this is the thing which they have specified, means although in the previous program if you see they have thrown the exception, it is being caught also, no issues, but you cannot determine what sort of exception have been thrown. So you can resolve this by putting this sort of statements in while you declare your function. So this is the case whenever you are throwing an exception from a function. So if you see the code, or if you try to understand it, what is actually happening here, there is a function. Okay, so the name of the function is fun, so it is likely to throw an exception. Okay, either it might be a pointer or it might be an int. So this much it is clear. Now if you see, so you might argue, sir, there is no try block here, or there is no catch block here. So what they have done is they have defined the try blocks and catch blocks in the invoking function or in the invoking method. So here the invoking function or method is your main. So what they have done, just try to see it, try fun null 0. Okay, so they have defined this function inside this try block. Now if this function is generating the exception, so it will be caught in the subsequent sections. Okay, so when this function is throwing, so this will be forwarded to the catch block and you will get the appropriate output. Okay, what you can also do is you can, yes, what you can do is you can nest multiple try catch blocks. Okay, so just see the program here. So there is one try block here. Inside this try block again they have placed one more try block. Okay, so try catch block is there, and finally this is the catch block for the first try block. So remember, try catch blocks, these have to be there in a sequence. Okay, if you are going for a nested try catch block, placement, remember the sequence in which you are placing, or else it will give you an error while you are executing your program. Okay, so this is also permitted here. So when an exception is thrown, all objects created inside the enclosing try blocks are destructed before the control is transferred to the catch block. So here what does it specify? Basically, whenever there is an exception, okay, so if any object is created inside the try block, so it will be destroyed. Why? Because the program has terminated. And what is the logic basically to destroy it? Your program has terminated incorrectly, and as a result there is no point in executing it. Okay, so for this reason it will be forwarded or it will be destroyed. Okay, so this is the main logic here. So I think this has ended. So one thing that they have missed here, and you can read it from books, is I think this part where is what was the thing? Multiple try blocks. Just a second. So is this part clear? I'll just check what is the thing that they are missing. Any doubts or anything which you want to clear? Sorry. One thing which has not been specified in this website is rethrowing an exception. Okay, so you can study this from your book. So in rethrowing an exception, what is actually happening? Whenever you throw an exception, it will be caught by a catch block. Then from the catch block again you will throw the exception. So this is basically your rethrowing an exception. Okay, so you can see this from your book. It is not that difficult. It is easy. Why inside the catch block parentheses are there three dots? So this particular thing, so this is a I mean catch block to catch your default exception. Means if you see previously here, catch is explicitly catching your integer exception, right? So if you are not specifying anything, so you can use this particular statement. So this will catch default exception, means whatever exception you throw, this particular catch block is able to catch it. Okay, so this is like if you remember like switch case. Okay, so there was something known as a default case, right? So just like this, if any option is not specified at that time, this particular block will get executed. So this is just the default case. So just try to relate it with the switch statement where there was a default case. Okay, so anything else? Is it clear, this try catch mechanism? Any doubts? Whatever you feel like, you can ask. You can just go through your books. You will see many examples are given. Even if you want, I will give you some basic code to implement this. mechanism. Okay, so next we can start up with your Koa, I guess. So you can just open this. So here, although there is nothing new here, so so this is the structure of your. Today what we are basically trying to see is the instruction cycle. Okay, what is actually happening when you try to execute an instruction. So now actually we are moving to the design of CPU, or what are the criteria which are actually affecting the design of a CPU. So first we'll see how instruction gets executed, and secondly we'll see the control unit, which is a very important part of your CPU. I think all of you know that inside your CPU you have got ALU and CU. So ALU structure, I think we have seen previously, adder, then multiplier, these circuits were placed and we have seen this. Now control unit we'll see. Okay, later on this class will basically will try to cover up what is happening when you are trying to execute an instruction. So if you remember, this was the structure of your first generation IAS. Okay, so although it is a very basic design, so you will see that this some components are present here, like you have got this accumulator, then you have got this MQ, multiplier quotient. If you remember, we had specifically seen a multiplier circuit. Then ALU is there, then data register. Okay, IBR is instruction buffer register, program counter, instruction register, address register, and this was the control unit. So we will see how control unit is designed later on. But if you try to relate it, so this is the fund basic I mean blockwise representation of your CU. Now if you see here, there are some lines connected. Okay, so these are known as your bus. Okay, so you have got address bus, you have got data bus. Okay, so why I am telling, or why we are going through this diagram, is so that the subsequent parts are clear to you. Okay, so what happens when we try to execute an instruction? So the operation or task that must uh, that must be performed by CPU are fetch instruction, interpret instruction, fetch data, process data, and finally write data. So CPU reads an instruction from memory. Instruction is decoded to determine what action is required. Then fetch data. The execution of an instruction may require reading data from memory or IO module. Finally, you have got process data. The execution of an instruction may require performing some arithmetic or logical operation on data. And finally, your write data. Okay, so the result of an execution may require writing data to memory or IO module. Okay, so these are the basic things which are actually happening when you are trying to execute an instruction. First you will fetch it, next you have to interpret it. If it requires any sort of data access, so you will get the data from memory or from IO, and finally you will execute it and you are going to write it back to your memory. Okay, so the CPU is connected to the rest of the system with the help of some buses. Okay, so you see that a CPU has got basically three types of bus: data bus, address bus, and control bus. Okay, so what does this bus stand for? Bus is actually pathway for communication. So whatever data you want to access, or whatever control signal the CPU is going to generate, so this will be communicated by your buses. Okay, So yes, is the connection buffering? So just try to follow whatever I'm trying to tell, because it is not that difficult. You have seen this. Okay. So data bus is used to transfer data. Address bus is used to access a particular memory location by putting the address of the memory location. So your address bus will have this uh, or will be used to access a particular memory location. Okay, control bus is used to provide the different control signals generated by CPU to different part of the system. As for example, memory read is a signal generated by CPU to indicate that a memory read operation has to be performed. So whatever control signals are generated, like whether it should be a read, whether it should be a write, or if there is an interrupt. Okay, so we'll see what is an interrupt later on. So these sort of signals are being communicated with the help of this control bus. Okay, so if you see here, there are three basic components of CPU: register bank, ALU, and control unit. Okay, there are several. So there are several data movements between those units. So I hope all of you are aware that you will. So there are these register banks, ALU, control units. So always there is going to be an information flow in and out of this system. So the basic components of CPU are your register banks, ALU, and control unit. Okay. So here if you see in the next slide, there is a diagram which is actually trying to depict this particular thing. There are these buses: control bus, data bus, address bus. Now control bus, what will actually, or what it is trying to do is, if a say a read signal is generated or a write signal is generated, or a particular I mean signal is generated to read or to perform an IO operation, so this will be communicated by this control bus. Next you have this data bus. I hope it is very clear what it is performing. Address bus also, I think it is very clear. So this is the, you can say, basic uh, representation of a CPU. Okay, register, control unit, ALU, control bus, data bus, and address bus. Okay, so here if you see again, they have just elaborated that only internal structure of CPU. So register banks are there, control unit is there, and your ALU is there. Now to communicate between these units inside the CPU, again you might have an internal CPU bus or an internal communication way, so which will help you to perform this particular communication, or it will facilitate the data movement inside the components of your CPU. Okay, so next comes register organization. So what does this mean? See, to match up the speed of CPU, I hope it is clear that why we are using registers, because registers are faster semiconductor memories which have higher speeds in comparison to your main memory. So there are various registers available in your CPU. Up till this much, I hope all of you are aware now. So this can be again categorized into two groups. One is your user visible registers, other is your control and status registers. So user visible registers, these are basically used for, say, storing data. Okay, or whenever say you are going for a memory reference, so you can store the values in those particular registers. Control and status registers, these are some registers which are related to the execution of an instruction. Like classic example is say your program counter. Okay, so these are the organization. One is your user visible register, other is your control and status registers. So you can just go through this. Okay, so here if you see, so see here what they are doing is they are just trying to elaborate this particular diagram only. Okay, ALU register control unit. So if you see here, here is your ALU, here is your registered bank. Registered bank means the set of registers that you have got. Okay, so this is just the register here, and here is your control unit. Okay, so these things are connected via an internal CPU bus. Okay, bus is basically communication pathway. Okay, so if you see here, there is say links from these individual systems to relating to all of them. Okay, so here there is, I think it is not that difficult to follow, or you can relate it, right? Is it clear? Okay, so next you have got this registers. So there the user visible registers can be categorized again into some types. So general purpose registers, data register, address register, and condition codes. So just read through it whatever is given here. So these are some general purpose register, like this can be used for any sort of work. Okay, or which can be used by the programmer, like your register pairs that you had got in your 8085. So these are your example of your general purpose register. So next you have got data registers. Okay, so okay, one more thing is you can use your general purpose registers for both addressing operation. Okay, as well as your normal data operation functions. So if you classic example might be your HL pair, HL register pair. So in one case you were using HL register pair for memory operation, in other case you were also using it to store the data. Okay, so data registers, address registers, so maybe somewhat general purpose, or they may be devoted to a particular addressing mode. So classic example here is your stack pointer, if you remember. So if there is a user visible stack addressing, then typically the stack is a memory and there is a dedicated register that points to the top of the stack. So these address registers are basically used for your addressing operations. So segment pointer, index registers, so these are some registers which are explicitly related to some particular addressing schemes. Okay, segment pointer, index register, I think it was not there in your 8085. So it is a bit difficult to relate, but um, previously we have seen some addressing mechanisms, right? Like base register addressing, relative addressing. So this segment pointer and index registers might help you there. Okay, although it again depends upon the architecture. If you are permitting those particular addressing schemes, at that time you need to have those registers there. Okay, so condition codes, also referred to as flags, are bits set by the CPU hardware as a result of operation. Okay, so I think this there was this PSW, right? processor status word in your 8085. So what it was actually doing, it was storing the some conditions, right? Whether say there is a carry, if on addition, whether the result is 0 or not. So those are your condition codes. Okay. Next, four registers are essential to instruction execution. So this is your program counter. Okay. Instruction register, memory address register, and memory buffer register. So I hope these functions are very clear because we have discussed it previously also, and I hope by now all of you know also what these registers mean. Okay. So here they are just defining this PSW, so you can read it. I think I did not or need not discuss it because you know it, you have already implemented it in your labs. So concept of program execution. So now you will see what actually happens when you are trying to execute an instruction inside your CPU. So first let us assume that each instruction copy occupies one memory word. So this was the case in your 8085 also. It was a byte addressable memory. So therefore execution of one instruction requires the following three steps. So fetch the contents of memory location pointed at by the program counter. So see PSW we can I don't know, I have taken this thing up in your lab elaborately. PSW. So if you open up your 8085 simulator, you will get something known as PSW. If you have got if you have installed it in your laptop, you can see it now also. You will see this PSW. Okay, so PSW is actually containing some status say words. So what are these? Or I'll share a link. You can just go there and see what it is actually. Actually, I discussed it explicitly in your lab classes. Uh, okay, I'll try to share an image. Just see it. So here I am sharing an image. Just see it. Oof, it is also not taking up the link. Okay, actually, I cannot paste the link here. I am pasting the link in your Hangout group. Okay, because I think it is very big for this chat, so it is not accepting the link. So just see that particular link. So this is basically your PSW. Okay, so I have placed the link in your Hangout group. So if you see here, so this is the basic organization for your 8085 as far as I think. So S, then Z, AC, CY, P. Now this X are your don't cares, or it is not placed, or values are not placed anything here. So S stands for your send it in the Hangout group. So yes, please try to open up this particular link. If possible, I'll try to add my browser. So if you see here this is your register, or say your PSW. So what it is containing, say S stands for your sign flag, Z stands for your zero flag, AC stands for auxiliary carry, and CY stands for your carry flag basically, and P stands for parity. So the contents have been placed in this particular order in your 8085 PSW. So whenever there is an operation, or if these particular conditions are met, so the corresponding bits are set. Now X here are don't care bits. So ideally you are not concerned with what is happening over in this X bits. Okay, so you can read this, and if you are having any doubts, please try to or you can ask me. Okay, so I think this is okay. Is it okay? So PSW, if you see here these things whatever is there in your 8085, it is there, but sometimes these things are also there, like your interrupt enable disable supervisor. Okay, so these things might also be there. So interrupt enable disable means what? It is a signal to either activate or say deactivate the say acceptance of interrupts. Okay, supervisor means what? Whether the CPU is executing in supervisor mode or user mode. So you can just relate it to your say administrator account or say normal user account. So this is basically your supervisor bit that you have got. So we'll now move to this particular thing. So how the instructions are getting executed, so we'll just try to see it. So fetch the contents of memory location pointed at by the program counter. The contents of this location are interpreted as an instruction to be executed, hence they are stored in the instruction register. So symbolically this can be written as IR is equal to PC, means the content of program counter. Next what you are doing is increment the contents of PC by 1. Next carry out the action specified by the instruction stored in IR. So the first two steps are usually referred to as the fetch phase, and the step 3 is known as the execution phase. So fetch cycle basically involves read the next instruction from the memory in the CPU, along with that update the content of program counter. So your fetch phase basically deals with that only. First you will read the content of your program counter, you will fetch it. Okay, and you are also going to update the program counter. Okay, and in execute phase, so this basically comprises of your step 3 here, or the third point whatever is given here. So you will perform that particular instruction. So this is termed as your execute instruction. So if you see here, they have given a diagram. So start, fetch, next instruction, execute instruction, and halt. So this process goes on repeating again and again. So this is basically a, so you can say, block diagrammatic representation of a basic instruction cycle. Okay, so you can read the contents, it is given elaborately here. So the first instruction is loaded in the instruction register. The instruction contains bits that specify the action to be performed by the processor. I hope all of you know how instructions are being stored in your program or in your memory. So it has got an opcode. So this opcode will activate the particular circuits which are required to operate the instruction. So the processor operates the instruction and performs the required action. So in general, the actions fall in four categories. Processor memory means data may be transferred from processor to memory or from memory to processor. Next, processor IO means you will transfer data to CPU, or rather say to the processor, to any peripheral device, or from the peripheral device to the processor. Data processing means some arithmetic or logical operations and control. An instruction may specify that the sequence of execution may be altered. So you can have the or you can have your branching instructions in your control category. Okay, so in branching, say JZ or JNZ, you are actually altering the sequence of execution. So this might be your control instructions. Okay, so next here, if you see here, they have given an instruction cycle state diagram. So you can read it. So what it is actually trying to convey is how the instructions are getting executed. Okay, and also there might be some instructions where a particular step might loop in, or it might also follow some other pathway. So first, if you see instruction address calculation, fetch, instruction operation, decoding. In operand address calculation, if the instruction is specifying for any operand, so it will go there. Next, what it is going to do, operand fetch. Indirection means what, if it is having, say, indirect addressing or such kind of things, so this will be performed. Next, data operation, operand address calculation, operand store. So this particular part is for writing. Okay, and this part is for reading. So the execution cycle of a particular instruction may involve more than one reference to memory. Also, instead of memory references, an instruction may specify an IO operation. So with these additional considerations, the basic instruction cycle can be expanded with more details view in this figure. The figure is in the form of a state diagram. Okay, so you can read this particular statements whatever is given here. So what they are doing is, you can just see it, although I have explained it. So this is your instruction execution. So is it okay? Okay then, so we will end up here. Okay then, thank you, and we'll meet next on, say, Wednesday. Okay, because tomorrow I think there is Eid and all, so next we'll meet on Wednesday. Okay, thank you, and stay safe, and also happy Eid to all my students. So thank you very much.